The first thing Bella noticed was that the music had stopped. Not slowly. Not the way music fades when a DJ reads the room. It cut. Like someone had pulled a wire from the wall. And in the silence that followed, that thick, airless silence, she felt every head in the room turn toward the entrance before she did. She turned last. And she understood immediately why nobody had spoken. He was standing just inside the double doors of the ballroom, still in his coat, not having bothered to remove it. Like he had not decided yet how long he was staying. Like the decision of whether this evening continued or ended was entirely his to make, and he had not made it yet. Tall. The kind of tall that changes the geometry of a room. His hair was packed back, dark, long, pulled neat against the back of his head. His face was smooth and hard and unreadable. A scar, thin, clean, angled, cut just beside his left eyebrow, catching the light in a way that made it impossible not to notice and equally impossible to stare at. His jaw was set. His eyes moved across the room slowly, not searching, cataloging. Nobody moved. And that was the thing, wasn't it? That was the thing that made Bella's chest go tight before she even knew his name. Not the way he looked. Not the scar or the coat or the stillness. It was that not one person in that room, not the hired staff, not the guests in their evening wear, not the men stationed by the doors who she had assumed were security, not one of them moved a single muscle without first checking, without first calculating, without first understanding what he wanted from this room before they let themselves breathe inside it. She had been standing at the center of the pre-wedding reception her fiancé's family had organized, 2 nights before the ceremony, a gathering of faces she mostly didn't know, in a venue that cost more than she had earned in her first 2 years working, wearing a deep green dress that fit her like it had been made specifically for her body, her pixie cut sharp and precise against her brown skin, her heels adding just enough height that she had felt, for most of that evening, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And now she didn't. Min-jae appeared at her side so suddenly she almost startled. He had been across the room 30 seconds ago. He was here now, and something about the way he arrived, too fast, too close, his hand finding her elbow before she had registered he was there, told her the speed was not about affection. His face was composed. She had learned, in the months of knowing him, that his face was almost always composed. It was one of the things she had found attractive early on, that control, that ease. Now she noticed that his hand on her elbow was not quite steady. The man by the door had not moved. He was looking at Min-jae. Just looking at him. The way a person looks at something they have seen before and have already made a decision about. And Min-jae was not looking back. That was the moment Bella understood. Not fully, not with any real information, but in the way the body understands things before the mind catches up, that something was very wrong. Not with the evening. Not with the venue or the guest list or the music that had stopped. With her. Something was wrong that involved her. The man by the door started walking. He did not walk fast. He did not walk like a man arriving at a destination. He walked like a man who had already decided the destination was his, and was now simply closing the distance between himself and what he owned. Every step was measured. No urgency. No performance. The crowd separated in front of him without being asked. Not dramatically. Just, people found reasons to take a half step to the left, or turn to speak to the person beside them, or suddenly become very interested in their drinks. Nobody looked directly at him for more than a second. He stopped in front of Min-jae. The silence in that small pocket of the ballroom was different from the silence in the rest of the room. The rest of the room had resumed, muted conversations, the clink of glasses, someone somewhere laughing at exactly the wrong moment. But here, in the 3 feet between these two men, the air was perfectly still. They did not embrace. Min-jae said something. Low in Korean, too fast for Bella to follow more than one word in 4. The man looked at him for a moment. Then, without responding to whatever Min-jae had said, he looked at Bella. Not the way men usually looked at her. Not assessment. Not interest. Just a long, direct look, the kind that felt less like being seen and more like being identified. Then he looked back at Min-jae. And he said in English, calm, unhurried, absolutely certain. She is not marrying you. The next hour was something Bella would spend a long time trying to reassemble in the right order. She remembered Min-jae's voice going up. She remembered reaching for his arm and feeling the tension in it, coiled, panicked, wrong. She remembered 2 men appearing from somewhere near the side doors, flanking Min-jae with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before and did not enjoy it. She remembered Min-jae looking at her, just once for less than a second, and the look on his face not being the one she expected. It was not anger. It was something closer to relief. She had not known what to do with that. She still didn't. She remembered being guided, not grabbed, not forced, but guided with the firm and unmistakable pressure of a hand at the small of her back, toward the door. She remembered turning to look for Min-jae and not finding him. She remembered the ballroom watching her leave and nobody saying anything. Nobody intervening. Nobody even moving toward her. She remembered stopping in the corridor outside and turning to face him fully for the first time. He was closer than she expected. She had to tilt her chin up slightly to look at his face, which she already hated. His coat was still on. His expression had not changed since he walked in. She said, very clearly, very deliberately, "Let go of me." He looked down at her. His hand, which had been at her back, dropped. Just like that. Without argument. And somehow that was worse. "Who are you?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm Choi Kangtae. And you are coming with me. This is the kind of story that takes a while to fully arrive in you. By the time it ends, you will have watched two people do real damage to each other, and real good, and you will not be entirely sure which one they meant to do more of. There is a pregnancy in this story that neither of them planned. There is a betrayal that comes from inside the walls, not outside them. There is a sacrifice that costs the man who makes it something he cannot get back. And there is a woman, sharp, fashionable, too proud for her own good sometimes, who came to Seoul for one future, and built a completely different one from the wreckage of the first. Stay with me. This one goes deep before it comes back up. If you are watching this from wherever you are in the world right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where this story is landing tonight. And if someone in your life needs to hear something real and complicated and true, send this to them. We will be here when they arrive. Kangtae's car was black and silent and moved through the Seoul night like it owned the road, which, Bella was beginning to understand, was not entirely a metaphor. She sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap and her jaw set and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Not because she had nothing to say. Because she was thinking. She had always been better at thinking than reacting, and the events of the last hour had given her more to think about than she had words for yet. He sat on the other side of the back seat. Not close. The distance between them was precise, the kind of distance that communicates intention. He was on his phone, reading something, and had not looked at her since the car started moving. She said, "What did Min-jae do?" Not a question. A statement, aimed at him like a dart, waiting to see where it landed. He kept reading his phone. "I know something happened," she said. "I am not stupid and I am not going to cry and I am not going to beg you to explain yourself. But I am also not going to sit in this car and pretend I don't know that whatever just happened back there, Min-jae knew it was coming. And he did not fight it." Kangtae turned his phone over in his hand. "Didn't look up. You're observant. That is not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked out the window. The city moved past, bright and dense and entirely indifferent to her situation. She had been in Seoul for 11 days. Long enough to learn 3 subway lines and the name of the cafe below her hotel and the way the light fell differently here in the evenings. Not long enough for any of it to feel like hers. "Where are you taking me?" she said. "Home." "You're home?" "Yes." She turned back to look at him then. He was looking at her now. The scar beside his eyebrow caught the passing street lights, appearing and disappearing in rhythm as the car moved. She said, "I don't know you." "I know. I was supposed to get married in 2 days." He said nothing. "And you?" She stopped. Measured herself. The anger was there, sitting right under the surface, but she had learned long ago that anger spent too early is anger wasted. She needed to understand before she reacted. She needed to know what she was actually dealing with. She said, "Are you going to tell me what is happening? At any point? Or is this just what it is?" He looked at her for a moment longer than felt comfortable. "Not tonight," he said. And then he went back to his phone. The mansion sat behind walls, high, clean, stone, in a part of the city that had been designed to feel separate from the rest of it. The kind of neighborhood where the streets were quiet even at midnight and the houses did not compete with each other because competition would require acknowledging the existence of neighbors. Bella walked in behind him and stood in the entrance hall and looked at the ceilings, high, lit indirectly, the kind of architectural detail that communicates wealth without announcing it, and thought, "I need a plan." A woman, maybe 60, small, with the kind of quiet efficiency that suggested she had been running this house longer than some of the staff had been alive, appeared and bowed slightly and said something in Korean. Kangtae answered without stopping walking. He was already halfway across the entrance hall. "She will be in the East Wing," he said, in English she understood for her benefit. "Give her whatever she needs tonight. She'll tell you in the morning if there's anything specific." And then he was gone. A door somewhere deeper in the house closed, not loudly but definitively. Bella stood in the entrance hall. The woman, whose name she would learn in the morning, was Mrs. O, looked at her with an expression that revealed nothing and everything simultaneously. The kind of expression that said, I have seen things in this house. I'm not here to judge them. I am here to do my job. She gestured toward the east wing. Bella followed her. The room was large and clean and stocked with things she had not asked for. A phone charger that fit her phone, a glass of water on the nightstand, a small arrangement of things in the bathroom that suggested someone had made educated guesses about what a woman arriving without luggage might need. Her luggage, she realized, was still at the hotel. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. Then she picked up her phone and called Min-jae. It rang 7 times. No answer. She called again. 8 times. No answer. She put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly and carefully, the way she did when she needed to think without the thinking turning into something she couldn't manage. She was in a stranger's house. In a foreign city. Her fiancé was not answering his phone. And the man who had brought her here had looked at her like she was a problem he had already solved, and had told her nothing about what the solution was, or what it was going to cost her. She needed information. She needed to think. She needed to understand what Min-jae had done, because something in the way Kang-tae had looked at his brother had not been jealousy. It had not been competition. It had been something older and colder and more specific than either of those things. She lay back on the bed without changing her clothes and stared at the ceiling until the city outside went fully quiet. She did not sleep for a long time. 3 days passed. She did not leave. Not because she couldn't. She tested that on the second morning, walking toward the front gate with her bag over her shoulder and her chin up, waiting for someone to stop her. Nobody stopped her. The gate opened when she approached it. Mrs. O appeared at her elbow just before she stepped through and said, calmly and without judgment, Mr. Choi asked me to let you know that your hotel has been settled and your luggage has been brought here. He also asked me to let you know that if you leave, he cannot guarantee your safety. Bella had stood at the open gate for a moment. Then she had turned and walked back inside. She was not afraid of him. That was important to her, to be clear about that, at least to herself. She was not staying because she was afraid. She was staying because she was not stupid, and something in that simple statement, he cannot guarantee your safety, had landed with a specificity that told her it was not a threat. It was a warning. And there was a difference between those two things that she had learned to feel out, growing up, in the way you learn to feel out things that nobody teaches you directly. She was staying until she understood what she was staying away from. She saw Kang-tae twice in those 3 days. Once in the corridor outside the dining room where they passed each other and he nodded once, briefly, the way you might acknowledge a colleague in a hallway, not unfriendly, not warm, simply transactional. And once in the evening, through the glass walls of a room she had been told was his study, where she had been walking past and happened to look in. He was at his desk. Jacket off, the collar of his shirt open at the top. She could see, just barely from the angle, the edge of something dark at his collarbone. The beginning of the dragon tattoo she had heard referenced, obliquely, by the staff. Just the tip of it, curling against his skin, like the tail of something much larger hidden underneath. He was reading and he had not noticed her. She kept walking. But she walked a little slower than she had before. On the 4th day Min-jae called. She was in the garden. She had found the garden on the 2nd day and had been using it in the mornings because it was the only part of the house that felt like it breathed, and she answered before the 2nd ring. Bella. His voice sounded the same. That was the disorienting thing. She had been preparing herself for something different, guilt-thick or changed or damaged in some way she could identify. But he sounded like himself. Composed. Easy. She said, where are you? I can't tell you that. Can't or won't. Pause. Then, both. She looked at the garden. A line of ornamental trees ran along the far wall, each one trimmed into a perfect sphere. Everything in this house was precise. Everything had been shaped deliberately. She said, I have been here 4 days, Min-jae. In your brother's house. Sleeping in your brother's east wing. I came to this country to marry you. I know. And you are calling me from a number I don't recognize to tell me you can't tell me where you are. He was quiet for a moment. There are things, he said, that got complicated. Before you arrived. I was going to handle it. What kind of things? He didn't answer. She closed her eyes. She had learned, over the months of knowing him, that when Min-jae went quiet it was not because he had nothing to say. It was because he was calculating how much of the truth he could give without giving the part that would cost him the most. She said, did you make a deal with someone? Using me. The silence that followed was exactly long enough to confirm it. Her hand tightened on the phone. Not dramatically. Just a small, controlled tightening, the way the body responds to something it has braced for but still feels. She said, how much? Min-jae said her name. How much was the debt, she said. that you cleared with my life. And he said, Bella. She hung up. She sat in the garden for a long time after that. Not crying. Not shaking. Just sitting with the understanding, the way you sit with something heavy that you've put down but haven't decided yet where to put permanently. She had loved him. That was the part that she needed to be honest about, even here, even alone in someone else's garden. She had genuinely loved Choi Min-jae. Not perfectly and not without reservations, she was too clear-headed for that, but really, she had chosen him with intention and flown to his country and prepared to build a life in a city that was not hers, and she had been happy about all of it. And he had used her name in a criminal debt arrangement and not told her. She sat with that. Then she stood up, straightened her clothes and went to find Kang Tae. She found him in the dining room, finishing a late breakfast alone, his phone face down on the table, a newspaper, an actual newspaper, physical, folded, open beside his coffee. She sat down across from him without being invited. He looked up. His expression didn't shift. He looked at her the way he looked at most things, as though he had already processed her arrival before it happened and was simply confirming his prediction. She said, Min-jae made a deal with someone. A criminal group. He used me as collateral. Kang Tae picked up his coffee. You knew, she said. He drank. That's why you stopped the wedding. Not jealousy. Not possession. Because if I was yours, in whatever way that works in your world, they couldn't touch me. He put the cup down. She leaned forward slightly. Not pleading. Just closing the distance between the conversation and the truth. Am I right, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, yes. She sat back. There it was. She had needed to hear it from him and he had said it and now she sat with it. Why didn't you just tell me, she said. Because knowing changes how you act, he said. And how you act in the next few weeks will determine whether the people Min-jae borrowed money from decide you're worth the effort. If you'd known, you would have tried to leave. And leaving would have made you visible. She looked at him steadily. He was not wrong. She would have tried to leave. She would have gone home and believed she was safe and she would have been none of those things. She said, how long? Until it's settled. That's not an answer. A few weeks, he said. Maybe a month. She looked out the window. The garden was still there. The perfectly spherical trees. The morning light. She said, I am not going to pretend to be your wife. He said, I'm not asking you to pretend anything. Then what are you asking? He picked up his newspaper. Stay inside the house, he said. Don't take calls from numbers you don't recognize. Don't tell anyone outside this property where you are. Those are the only 3 things I'm asking. She waited for more. There was no more. She pushed her chair back and stood up. Then she said, quietly because it mattered to her that she said it out loud, thank you. For what you did at the reception. I don't know why you did it the way you did. But thank you. He did not look up from the newspaper. But she noticed, before she left the room, that he had stopped reading. The weeks that followed settled into a shape that neither of them had planned for. She was not a prisoner. That became clear quickly. The house was large enough to move through without running into him. She had spent the first week carefully mapping it, understanding its rhythms, learning where the staff gathered and where they didn't. She had the garden. She had the library, which was stocked with books in 3 languages and which she had started working through with the focused energy of someone who needed something to do with her mind. She had, eventually, a laptop, left on her desk one morning without explanation, and which she used to continue the remote consulting work she had paused for the wedding. Life, strange and unasked for as it was, resumed around her. Kang Tae was present in the house without being intrusive. He had his rhythms and she had hers, and most days they intersected only at meals, which she had started taking in the main dining room because eating alone in her wing felt like a concession she wasn't willing to make. He did not make small talk. But he was not silent either. He would ask occasionally about the book she was reading. She would answer. Sometimes he responded. Sometimes he didn't. It was the most functional non-relationship she had ever been in. She started to notice things. The coffee she preferred appeared every morning without her mentioning it twice. A coat, well-made, warm in her size, materialized in the cloakroom the week the temperature dropped, with no note and no acknowledgement. The library acquired, over the course of 2 weeks, for books she had mentioned in passing having read and enjoyed. She found them on the shelf one afternoon and stood looking at them for a long moment, running her fingers over the spines, not sure what to do with the feeling the discovery produced. She did not ask him about any of these things. Neither did he offer. The night it shifted, the night that changed the shape of things, began with an argument. She had been on the phone with her mother. One of those calls where she spent 40 minutes navigating carefully around the truth, answering questions with half answers and redirecting with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it long enough that the guilt of it had become familiar. Her mother had asked about the wedding. She had said there had been a delay. Her mother had asked about Min-jae. She had said he was fine. Her mother had asked when she was coming home and she had said, soon. Not a specific soon. Just the word, which had its own particular weight when you were lying. She had ended the call and sat on the bed and felt the full specific weight of what she was carrying. The life her mother thought she was living. The life she was actually living. And the growing, uncomfortable awareness that the second one had started, slowly and without her permission, to feel more real than the first. She left her room. She walked, not with any destination, just moving because stillness was worse, through the corridors of the house. Past the library. Past the room with the glass walls. She ended up in the kitchen, which was empty this late, and stood at the counter and filled a glass of water and drank it slowly. Kangtae appeared in the doorway. He was not dressed for bed. Still in dark trousers and a half-buttoned shirt, which she noticed before she decided to notice it. The dragon tattoo was more visible from here, she could see it properly for the first time. It covered his shoulder and curled down one side of his chest, and the detail in it was extraordinary, the kind of work that takes both time and trust. He looked at her. Then at the glass of water. He said, "Do you need anything?" She almost laughed. The question was so practical for midnight. She said, "No. I was just, no." He moved to the counter. Not close. Just present in the room in a different way than he had been from the doorway. She said, "Do you ever think about what this looks like? From the outside?" He considered the question. "I know what it looks like," he said. "And it doesn't bother you?" "No." She looked at him. There was something direct and real about the way he said things that she had stopped finding disconcerting and started finding something else, though she hadn't named what something else was yet. She said, "Why not?" "Because what it looks like and what it is are not the same thing," he said. "I learned a long time ago not to spend energy managing the difference." She was quiet for a moment. "Must be nice," she said. "To have a world where you can just let people think what they want." He looked at her steadily. "You can," he said. "You're choosing not to." She felt that land. Not because it was unkind, it wasn't, it was just accurate. And accuracy, when it finds a soft place, has its own particular sting. She didn't respond. But she didn't leave either. They stood in the kitchen for a while longer than was strictly necessary for a glass of water. And something in the quality of the silence between them was different from the silence at breakfast, or in the corridor, or at dinner. This one had a different texture. Warmer. Less managed. She noticed it. She suspected he did too. Eventually she said good night. He said good night back. She walked to her room and got into bed and lay there in the dark thinking about the way the tattoo had looked in the kitchen light and told herself very firmly to go to sleep. She took a long time to go to sleep. 3 weeks later she found out she was pregnant. She sat on the edge of the bathroom counter and looked at the test and felt the world reorganize itself around this single new fact. Her mind went to the calendar immediately. She was a practical person. The calendar was the first thing. The calendar did not give her clean answers. She and Min-jae had been together, she did not flinch from the arithmetic of it, in the weeks before she came to Seoul. And there was a night 2 weeks after she had moved into the East Wing with Kangtae. One night. Unplanned by either of them, unnamed by either of them after, existing in the space between them now like a door that had been opened and neither of them had walked fully through. The timing made certainty impossible. She sat with the test in her hand for a long time. Then she got up, washed her face and went downstairs. She found him in the study. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She entered and closed the door behind her and stood in the middle of the room. She said, "I'm pregnant." He was at his desk. He put his pen down. The silence lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Maybe less. She had been watching his face and in those 5 seconds she saw, briefly, quickly before it was managed away, something that was not calculation. Something that moved through his expression too fast to name with certainty but which she filed away anyway, in the part of her mind that collected small true things about him. He said, "How far?" "I don't know yet. I need to see a doctor." "I'll arrange it," she said, "Kangtae. I need you to understand what I'm telling you. I don't know, I can't tell you right now, whose it is." He looked at her. She held his gaze. She was not going to look away from this. It was too important. He said, "I heard you." He stood up from behind the desk. Moved to the side of it. Not toward her. Just changing his position the way he did sometimes when he was processing something and needed to be less stationary. He said, "You and the child will be protected. Nothing about that changes." She said, "You say that like it's simple. For me it is." She looked at him. He was not performing this. He was not being generous for an audience. The room had 2 people in it and he was saying this to one of them directly, with the same matter-of-fact certainty that he said everything. She said, "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you are here," he said. "And you are mine to protect. That is not complicated." She felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, internal movement. Like something settling into a new position. She said, "I am not yours." He said, "That is a separate conversation." And she couldn't argue with it. Because she wasn't sure he was wrong. She saw a doctor 3 days later. A woman, discreet, who came to the house and said nothing except what was medically relevant and asked no questions about the circumstances. The appointment confirmed the pregnancy and the approximate timing confirmed what she already knew, that certainty was not coming from the calendar. Min-jae would need to be told. That fact was unavoidable and she did not look forward to it. She called him. "Different number again." He answered. She told him. The silence on his end was different from Kang Tae's silence. It was less controlled. She could hear something moving through it. She couldn't tell if it was calculation or grief or something else entirely. He said, "Is it mine?" She said, "I don't know." Another silence. Then he said, "You're still in his house?" "Yes." He said, "He's done something to you. Made you think you're safe there. You're not Bella. You don't know him." She said, "I know what you did. With my name and someone else's dead." Silence. She said, "Don't call me about safety." She hung up again. The following weeks did something to the house. Something subtle, difficult to point to, but real. It was in the way Kang Tae moved through the same spaces as her, a little more aware of where she was, a little less invisible about it. It was in the questions he started asking at dinner. Not big questions, not "how are you feeling" or "is there anything you need" in that performative way. Small questions. Specific ones. How did the call go with the consulting client she'd mentioned? Had the library book she finished been worth it? Whether the morning sickness, which was manageable, not dramatic, just a persistent background discomfort, was better or worse in the afternoons. She answered. Honestly. Briefly. And she started asking things back. Not because she had decided to, but because the questions occurred to her and she had never been good at keeping things that occurred to her to herself. She learned that the scar beside his eyebrow was from a knife. He said this the way someone says a weather fact, without weight, when he was younger and had made a decision that someone else had disagreed with. She learned that he had built the library himself, not inherited it. The books were his, accumulated over years, and he read more than she had assumed. She learned that he cooked, occasionally late at night when the house was quiet. That was how he processed things that could not be processed at a desk. She learned that his feelings for his brother were not simple. That Min-jae had been, before the debt, before the deal, before all of it, someone Kang Tae had tried repeatedly to pull back from the edges of things. And had failed repeatedly to reach. She said, "Do you blame yourself for what he did?" He was quiet for a moment. "I blame myself for not seeing it in time," he said. She said, "That's not the same as being responsible for it." He looked at her. She said, "You can't want better for someone and then own it when they choose worse. That's not how it works." He looked at her for a long time after that. She couldn't quite read the expression but she felt the weight of it. He said, "You're very clear about things." She said, "I've had to be." It was Mrs. O who told her about Seoul. She said it carefully, the way Mrs. O said everything, measured, factual, without editorial comment. Seoul was one of the organization's most trusted people. Had been for 8 years. Had access to schedules, movements, contacts. Had been feeding information to the rival faction. The same faction Min-jae's debt had originated from, for the last 4 months. Bella sat very still. Mrs. O said, "Mr. Choi does not know that I am telling you this. He would not want you to worry." She said, "Why are you telling me?" "Because you are a practical woman," Mrs. O said. "And practical women should have full information." After Mrs. O left, Bella sat in the garden and thought about the fact that somewhere in this house, in the structure of people and loyalties that were supposed to be the walls around her, there was a door being held open from the inside. She told Kang Tae that evening. She expected a reaction. Some version of surprise or calculation, or the flat controlled response he used when things required it. Instead he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How long have you known?" "I just found out," she said. "Mrs. O." He nodded. Just nodded, slowly, like something had clicked into place. He said, "I've been watching her for 2 weeks. I wasn't sure." She said, "You knew." "I suspected." She said, "And you didn't tell me." He looked at her. She said, "You cannot keep doing that. Protecting me by keeping things from me. It doesn't work. I'm not safer for not knowing." Something crossed his face. Not quite guilt, She was not sure Kangtae did guilt in the conventional way, but something adjacent to it. An acknowledgement. He said, I hear you. She said, that's the second time you've said that to me. He said, both times I've meant it. She believed him. Which was its own kind of complicated. Min-jae made his move on a Tuesday. She didn't know it was happening until it already was. She was in the garden, late afternoon, the light doing that particular thing it did in Seoul in the early evening, warm and angled and making everything look slightly more significant than it was, when she heard the cars. She didn't know they were wrong at first. Cars came and went from this property. But there were too many of them and they had stopped at the wrong place, and the energy from inside the house changed in a way she had started to recognize. A tightening, a quickening, a shift in the ambient noise that meant things were no longer normal. She moved inside. Mrs. O was already walking toward her. Go to the east wing, Mrs. O said. Lock the door. What's happening? East wing. No. She went. She heard voices from somewhere deeper in the house. Controlled but not calm, the distinction she had learned to make. She locked the door and sat on the bed and listened. It lasted perhaps 40 minutes. She heard a sound she could not identify, something like impact, not loud, just distinct. She closed her eyes. When the house went quiet again, she stayed where she was for another 10 minutes. Then she unlocked the door and went into the corridor. Kangtae was in the hallway outside her wing. He was upright and composed and still in his jacket, except that the right side of it was darker than it should have been, and it took her brain a moment to process what she was looking at. She said, "You're hurt." He looked down at himself. Like he had forgotten. "It's manageable," he said. She said, "Come inside." She had done a first aid course years ago as part of a workplace requirement. She had not expected it to be relevant to her life in any serious way. It was relevant now. He sat on the edge of the bed, her bed in the east wing, which was the nearest room with a properly stocked first aid kit, and she cleaned the wound with the focused attention of someone who needed to focus on the task and not on anything else. He did not make a sound. Not once. She said, "Who was it?" He said, "People who should not have been able to find a way in. But someone made it easier for them." Seori. He nodded. She worked carefully. The wound was not minor, but it was not life-threatening. A clean cut, deep, along the outside of his upper arm, that had bled significantly. She closed it as well as she could and bound it, and then sat back on her heels and looked at him. He was looking at her. She said, "Min-jae told them to come." He was quiet for a moment. "He sent them information," he said. I don't know how much he understood about what they intended to do with it. She said, "Does it matter?" He thought about this. Then he said, "To me, yes. He's still my brother." She looked at him. This man who had removed her from a ballroom and brought her to his house and said she was his to protect and had meant every word of it, and who still, underneath all of it, had a wound that looked like a younger brother who had needed more than could be given. She said, "Tell me. The beginning. What actually happened with the debt?" He looked at her for a long moment. And then he told her. All of it. From the beginning. Min-jae's gambling, which had started small and grown into something serious over 2 years. The faction that had extended credit far beyond what was reasonable because they had been waiting for leverage, not repayment. The deal, made 6 months before Bella had boarded her flight to Seoul, in which Min-jae had offered the woman he was going to marry as a form of settlement, a piece of social currency that would buy him time he never planned to actually use, because he had always believed he would fix it before it became real. He had not fixed it. And Bella had landed in Seoul and Kangtae had found out, not 6 months before but 10 days before the wedding, when it was almost too late to stop it cleanly. She sat with all of this. She said, "He thought you wouldn't find out." He said, "He thought a lot of things." She said, "Why didn't you tell me at the beginning?" He said, "Because you would have left. And leaving was the one thing I could not protect you from." She said, "You couldn't have just told me the truth and let me make my own choice." He said, "No." She said, "Why not?" He said, "Because I knew what the right choice was. And I wasn't willing to let you make the wrong one." She looked at him. "That is exactly the problem with you," she said. "Not without heat." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. The following weeks were quieter. The rival faction, with Seoul removed and the access point closed, pulled back. Kangtae moved against the debt itself, not violently but financially in the calculated way he did most things, and dismantled it piece by piece until the faction had less leverage than the cost of continuing to apply pressure. Min-jae was removed from the organization. Not dramatically. Not with cruelty. He was simply no longer part of it, and arrangements were made for him to leave Seoul. He called Bella once, the night before he left. She answered. He said her name. She said, "I know you're leaving." I wanted to say he stopped. Started again. I didn't mean for it to go the way it went. The deal. I never thought. She said, I know. I loved you, he said. I need you to know that was real. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I know that too. He was quiet. She said, go somewhere and do better, Minjae. That's all I have to say about it. She heard him exhale. Something in it sounded like a man putting something down. He said, Kangtae will protect you. Whatever you think of how this happened, he will protect you. She said, I know. She meant it. The pregnancy progressed. She stopped being surprised by Kangtae and started simply observing him, which was its own kind of intimacy. He was not tender in the conventional sense, he did not hover or fuss or express things in the vocabulary of warmth. But he was consistent. He showed up at the edges of things without making a production of it. He was there. There was an evening, 8 weeks before she was due, when she was in the library and could not get comfortable and had given up on the book and was sitting in the armchair with her feet up and her eyes closed when she heard him come in. He sat down across from her. She didn't open her eyes. He said, can I ask you something? She said, you're going to regardless. Pause. She thought she might have heard something almost like amusement in the silence. He said, are you afraid? She thought about it genuinely. She said, of what specifically? Of not knowing, he said. The baby. The father. What it means either way. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her with that direct, specific look that she had stopped trying to translate and had started simply receiving. She said, yes, sometimes. He nodded. She said, are you? He thought about it, which she appreciated, that he actually thought before answering. He said, I know what it would mean to me either way. So no, I'm not afraid of the result. She understood what he was saying. She sat with it. She said, Kangtae. He looked at her. She said, I don't know how we got here. He said, I do. She said, that's not a comfort. He said, I know. It's just true. She looked at him for a long moment. The scar by his eyebrow. The hair packed neat. The particular quality of his stillness that she had started to think of privately as the most honest thing about him, that in a world of performance he simply did not perform. She said, I think I... She stopped. He waited. She said, I think you should know. That whatever this is, I'm not pretending anymore. I haven't been for a while. He was very still. Then he said, I know. She said, you always say that. He said, because it's usually true. She almost smiled. Against her own better judgment and with full awareness that she was doing it. He did not smile back. But something in his face changed. Small. Specific. She felt it like a hand placed carefully over something that had been open. The baby came on a Thursday morning in early spring. A girl. She was small and certain and arrived with the focused intensity of someone who had already decided she was not going to be rushed. Bella held her and felt the specific, impossible weight of a new life in her hands and thought, not of Minjae, not of the wedding that never happened, not of the faction or the debt or the ballroom or the car moving through the Seoul night. She thought of her mother, and how she was going to explain all of this, and how her mother, who had seen enough of life to know that love rarely arrives in the shape you planned for it, would probably laugh before she cried. Kangtae was there. She had not asked him to be. He simply was. He stood at the edge of the room and looked at the child the way he looked at most things, carefully with full attention, and she watched his face, and what she saw on it was not the managed stillness of the man from the ballroom. It was something quieter. Something that had not been there before. Something that looked like it was staying. The test was done 3 weeks later. Minjae had moved through legal channels, the last card he held, perhaps the only clean one, to request it. Bella had agreed. She had needed to know too. She sat with Kangtae when the result came. The child was his. She looked at the paper. Then she looked at him. He was looking at the child, who was asleep, who was completely indifferent to the significance of the moment, who had her mother's nose and someone's jawline that Bella was going to spend some time thinking about. She said, it's yours. He said, I know. She said, you knew before the test. He said, I hoped. There's a difference. She looked at him. She had never heard him use that word before. In all the weeks and months of knowing him, this man who was careful and controlled and spoke in certainties, she had never heard him say hoped. She said his name. He looked at her. She said, don't keep things from me anymore. He said, I'll try. She said, that's not good enough. He held her gaze. Then he said, I will not keep things from you anymore. She nodded. He said, Bella. She looked at him. He said, I know this is not the life you planned for. She said, no. He said, but I want it to be the one you choose. She sat with that for a long moment. The weight of it. The simplicity of it. The fact that he had said it the way he said everything, without performance, without decoration, without the safety net of irony. She said, ask me again in a year. He looked at her. Then he said, all right. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was the most honest thing either of them had said to each other in all this time, which, considering the volume of honesty this story had required, was saying something. She called her mother that evening. She told her, not everything but more than before. She said the wedding had not happened and that she was no longer with Min-jae. She said she was still in Seoul. She said she had a daughter, 3 weeks old, strong, opinionated already, and that there was a man, and that the man was complicated, and that she was choosing to stay. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Is he good to you?" Bella thought about the coat in the cloakroom, the books on the shelf, the way he had told her the truth in a hospital room when he didn't have to, the way he had stood at the edge of a room and looked at a child he had not yet had confirmed as his own, and something on his face had stayed. She said, "Yes." Her mother said, "Then that's enough for tonight. Tell me about her." So Bella did. 2 weeks after that, on a morning in late spring when the light in Seoul was doing that thing it did, warm, angled, making everything slightly more significant than it was, she stood in the garden. The baby was against her chest in a wrap, small and warm and completely certain about her own comfort. Bella's pixie cut had grown out slightly at the edges and she hadn't decided yet whether to cut it back. Her brown skin caught the morning light. She was wearing one of the green dresses she had brought with her, the good ones from before, from the version of this trip she had planned, because she had decided, quietly, to stop saving them for something. She could see Kangtae across the courtyard. On a call. His back to her. The dragon tattoo hidden under his jacket. The packed hair. The particular quality of his stillness that meant he was listening to something he was not yet going to respond to. He did not know she was watching. She stood there a little longer than necessary. There was grief in it. She would not pretend otherwise, grief for the future she had planned, for Min-jae as she had believed him to be, for the version of herself who had boarded that flight certain about everything. That version was gone and she was not going to resurrect her. But there was also this. The morning. The garden. The child asleep against her chest. The man across the courtyard who had done something irreversible for her before the story had even properly begun, and who had not, in all the time since, asked her to thank him for it. She thought, not for the first time and not without some knowledge of how complicated it was, that this was real, that it was hers, that she had not planned it, and that sometimes the things you do not plan for are exactly the things that, in the end, you would not trade. She turned and walked back inside. The garden was quiet behind her. The morning continued. That's the end of this one. And if you made it here, thank you. Genuinely. You stayed through all of it and this story asked a lot of you. I have 2 questions before you go. The first one, when Bella found out what Min-jae had done, she could have left. Kangtae told her himself the gate was open. She chose to stay. Do you think she was brave for that, or do you think she was making a mistake she got lucky with? And the second one, the moment the story turned for you. The moment you knew there was no going back for either of them. I want to know which scene it was. Because for everyone it's different. Drop it in the comments. I mean it. This has been her story. Some people come into your life like a collision, and you spend a long time not knowing whether to call it damage or arrival. We will see you in the next one.